And I think, give it over to John. Introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kelly. So I am John Anfinson. I'm Superintendent of the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area. We are the only unit of the National Park Service whose mission is the Mississippi River, which makes us the Mississippi River's National Park. So one of the greatest rivers in the world, the greatest river in America, and we are its national park. So pretty big deal. I feel odd though, because I'm coming in as this federal representative into one of the most local of conversations. And so I'm here to help you think about how to protect and preserve this river and its resources and do the best for the communities along it. That's what the National Park Service does throughout America. We tell the stories and protect we tell the most important stories of America in its most important places, and we try to protect and preserve those places and stories. This is the one about the Mississippi, and we want to do that here. So I also want to thank you for inviting me, because I really wish the developers would have done this.
What? Say that again.
I will say it again. I wish the developers would have invited me to a charrette like this, where I could have explained to the developers who we are, what we're about, why we matter, and then actually see that in the design and things that came out at the end. And that never happened. And so I will admit I'm extremely frustrated about being left out of the process, even as a federal agency. So I'm glad this opportunity that you're doing is you're going to take what I have to tell you. You're going to do another charrette and another one and another one. You're going to learn from each one. Take the best of what we each have to offer. Excuse me. And then use that to form the whole of your argument. So don't expect me to answer every question in the way you want it, to the extent you want it, because I probably can't do that. But I think if you look at everything all together, you'll get there. So thanks for letting me be a part of building that idea with you. People are looking for development to be done in a different way, different from what it's been done in the past. But I think right now it feels like what it's been done, always been done, is happening again. Yet here in the 21st century, we expect something different. And it seems like the same old thing we saw in the 19th and 20th centuries. So how do we get to something different, a different conversation? So let me tell you a little bit about my national park. 1973, Minnesota thought, there are probably places within the state that we should protect. And they passed the Minnesota Critical Areas Act. And under the act, it said, hey, state of Minnesota, people of Minnesota, you can designate, can I get a glass of water or something? Okay, so you can designate places that are really significant. Well, only one got designated. And next, Governor Wendell Anderson designated the Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area, a 72-mile reach of the Mississippi. They're the Twin Cities as a state critical area. But it's just an executive order. It had to be renewed. So 3 years later, Governor Quee, a Republican, he renewed that executive order and said, this should be it. This is a 72-mile stretch of the Mississippi that's incredibly significant. And then in 1980, the Metropolitan Council made it permanent. But the people behind this effort to preserve this stretch of river said that's not enough. We have to do something better, something more. What if we could make that same 72 miles a national park? Then it's going to be one of these icons in the pantheon of American national parks, and they're going to have to do the right thing by it. So in 1988, Congress established the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area. And the point I'm making here is that this wasn't an idea that was established from the federal level. This was an idea that was established at the state and local levels and then became national. So there's some people who say, oh, this is an imposition of the federal government on the locals. No, it's just the opposite. In fact, they didn't even make federal regulations for the most part for this national park, because Senator Dave Durenberg, who was a Republican, said, we already have a state critical area act that says, here's how you have to protect things. It wasn't quite good enough. And so a few years ago, we actually got critical area rules. And now there's rules for the entire 72 miles of the Mississippi River on how you do development within 6 different areas. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. So we were created with the idea of protecting and preserving this Mississippi River National Park. And you know what? The main kind of mission statements are, if you read our legislation, it's about guiding development. We were put here to help guide development and get people talking to each other, just like I'm doing right now, and that you've allowed me to do, to think about how we do the best things for the river in the best ways. So this is fulfilling my mission and the mission of why Congress authorized this national park. So a second question I was asked to think about is, what would I do, or what would we, the National Park Service, do if this was a blank slate? One is, I would say, we have critical area rules for how you are supposed to develop. Follow the critical area rules. Second, we have a comprehensive management plan. When we were created, they formed a 24-member commission, and that commission was haggling over how this park would be designed, thought about, treated, promoted, cared for, interpreted. And there's all kinds of aspects in our comprehensive management plan. At the end of that commission, the governor of Minnesota signed the agreement, as did the Secretary of the Interior. So there is a comprehensive plan signed between the governor of Minnesota and the Secretary of the Interior that says how this land will be treated. That's a pretty powerful tool, I would think. So that's in place. And so between the critical area rules and our comprehensive management plan, they really set out some clear direction about development. So Michael's asked me Michael Shane's asked me to repeat what I just said. There are two components. One is our comprehensive management plan, which was signed in 1995. 1995. So it's been in place for quite a while. It's a comprehensive management plan. Every national park in the country has either a comprehensive management plan or a general management plan that says how that park will be managed, interpreted, what its focus is. But everything you can think of is embodied in that comprehensive management plan for us. It is on our website, www.nps.gov/miss, M-I-S-S. So you can go there and under management, find our comprehensive management plan. There's also the critical area rules. Now these are rules that cover the entire 72-mile corridor. And they actually have to be embodied in city ordinances at the end, and in the city comprehensive plans. So each city in this corridor is redoing its comprehensive plans, and each one of them has to embody the critical area rules in those plans. So that is underway, and we're reviewing some. When Michael's asked the question of when was what formulated? Colleen, do you have the date? It was just a few years ago. It's like 3 years ago, I want to say that the rules were actually finalized. Yeah, maybe about 2016 the rules were finalized. It took a while, and it was finally done. We used to, every city kind of used to approach it differently, but now under the rules, every city has to approach it the same way. There are 21 towns and cities within our 72 miles. 21 towns and cities in our 72 miles. So we won't just work with Minneapolis or St. Paul. We go from the top of Hennepin County, Dayton and Ramsey up there, to the bottom of Dakota County below Hastings. So I have 72 miles and all these communities to work with in 5 counties. So, so that's where I would start in terms of how we would look at this as blank slate. Secondly, I would want to know the context, the bigger context. Just to the north of the Upper Harbor Terminal is a big regional park, North Mississippi Regional Park. What if that was connected to this? What function does North Mississippi already serve for the north side? How well is it used? What is it used for? Do we need more of that? We need to understand that big park is just to the north. So how does it interplay with that? Just to the south and downriver, as you get further downriver, there's 4 blocks east of 94 that is light industrial. What could that be in the future between the north loop or north part of downtown and the Upper Harbor Terminal? What potential to address issues and concerns North Minneapolis and others have could happen in that space? What can happen across 94 within this community? And so then what actually has to happen on this site? What does this site need to do that's not being done or can't be done somewhere else? So if we look at this site in isolation and you expect it to solve all of the problems in North Minneapolis or the city of Minneapolis or anywhere, then people start cramming in everything they can think of and make a lot of demands. And I don't know, is that viable for 140-acre site anywhere, given where it's located? So something to think about is, how do we put this in, really understand the context of this 48 acres, and then think about what solutions it can help us think about. So the last question I was asked to look at was, so what are a little more of the standards? What are the specific standards? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but if you look at our comprehensive management plan, it talks about a shoreline preservation area. And it says that, in our comprehensive plan, it says the shoreline preservation area should be 100 feet. The first 40 feet should be above the ordinary high water mark, should be undisturbed. The next 60 feet back should have minimal disturbance. So in all, you have an area of 100 feet back from the ordinary high water mark with minimal disturbance. And then you can start talking about development behind that. The critical area rules, there's six critical areas. Urban mixed is one of those. This is in the urban mixed. It's not urban core, it's not rural, it's urban mixed. It's seen as transitional between urban to the other categories. And so in the urban mixed category, the height of any building within the first 300 feet from the river is only 65 feet. So that's about 6 stories. So you don't want to put a 10-story tall building right up against the river looming over it. That's a violation of the rules as they stand right now. Now you can get a conditional use permit and go above that. But do we want to begin by looking for exceptions to the rules every chance we get, or do we want to really stick to the rules? Again, this is my blank slate, so I can argue for what I want. So 300 feet back, if you look at this site, at the northern end of this site, north of Dowling, 300 feet goes back the whole limit of the site. If you look down to the south end of it, it goes back 400 and 500 feet. So you can do a lot more at the southern end of the site than you can at the northern end of the site. So how do you position? And so you can still build, a performing arts center. You can still build a community hub. You can still build a hospitality center within that 300 feet. If it's of the right scale and height. And then if you actually tear it back and away from the river, it can be tiered up. It doesn't have as big an effect. So those are some of the big factors. And the views from and to the river are what it really emphasizes. How do we protect those views from the river and to the river for the most people? So that's the primary one. Colleen, I don't know if there's anything you want to add. There's vegetation stuff, but that's the principal ones that apply here. So I'm going to stop there because this is really supposed to be a conversation, and I just want to tee it up a bit. I think we have a lot of notes already scratched up here, so I think we got to start. So let me stop there.
You want to stack the questions a little bit. So we've got Bill, we've got Jake, we've got Michael, and Steve. We're just going that order.
I'm looking for you to be the referee here, and let me know. Okay, Bill, you got to.
Yeah, what my question is, I don't observing local parks as they're done. Very often there's what I would call a proactive plan. What we talked about was more reactive. Thou shalt not be disclosed. Buildings have to be restrained. Is there a proactive plan that says parcels are to be acquired and turned into a use other than what they have now?
I mean, there is a vision within our national park that we were designated. So the question, I'm sorry, was could we take a parcel that's being used for something else and put it into a new use? Is there a plan or program to do those kind of things? Is that right?
Yeah, because, and again, I've seen parks where there will be no new development made in land that is deemed to be park, and that as an owner matures and puts their house for sale, it cannot be sold. That sort of thing. When there's a proactive plan to expand park in use other than what it is.
So the question again is there a proactive plan to like acquire land to bring it into into a city park or a regional park? I think the Park and Rec Board is working very hard already to plan out what can be brought into the park system. They're buying land with the vision of incorporating it along the river into the Minneapolis park system. So I think that's happening, and I think it's really good. Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a proactive work in that already. from the national park perspective, from my, I want to talk to my national park unit and what we can do. So we're looking to the communities to do this kind of thing. And we want to help communities to think about how to do the right thing. And we will say, look at our comprehensive plan. If you have some land come up that would not have fit with those rules or would not have fit with our comprehensive management plan in the past, how can we make them fit when we have a chance to make them fit? And that's what we, like with this property, that's what we'd like to encourage is, we know what it was used for in the past, but what could it become in the future in terms of if we begin with those rules and we begin with that comprehensive plan idea? Yeah, someone just mentioned that if you look at our letter to the city of Minneapolis on this project, we lay out our development guidelines and issues and our vision for what this place could be pretty clearly and pretty strongly. So I think, Michael, you were next. So where can our letter be found? Is it on our website?
We can get the letter that you wrote last year?
Yes.
We can post that.
Yeah. We'll download all the materials that we put out.
Yeah, so it should be, I don't know if it's on the main website, but we'll make sure it's loaded up.
Got Jake, got Michael, got Steve.
I got two quick questions, if possible. One is I'm curious, how could the land be under the National Park Service and federal protection, and then still have private landholders? I'm curious, is there a legal tool to prevent the privatization of this land that's already held by a public body, or if you can speak to that dynamic, because it seems like a contradiction. And then
let's hold that, and let me get that one first. I'll probably forget the first one by the time we get to the second one. So the question is, since we're a national park, and this is within the national park boundaries, do we have the tools to prevent, for example, a sale of public property for private use? No. So there's 54,000 acres within our boundary. We own 64. On those 64 acres, I have all the jurisdictions of any national park in the country that owns its land. But when I'm off that 64 acres, I have to work through the state process. This was a compromise between, in Congress, between Democrats and Republicans to say, let's come up with a compromise for a place that's already heavily developed, heavily used. This isn't like, some Western Park, big natural piece of land. This was already a heavily used piece of land, this 54,000 acres. So we had to figure out a compromise. That compromise was state rules would guide us for the most part. With the signing of our legislation in 1988. It's called cooperative federalism. It was an idea.
Have anything to say about the GAF being a neighbor of the Upper Harbor and the Upper Harbor terminal not including the GAF? And just curious what your thoughts are about the GAF being on the National Park Service.
Yeah, so the question is, what do I think about GAF and the fact that it's within the boundaries of the national park? It's the idea that there's a lot of stuff within our boundaries that fits our mission, fits why we're here, and there's a lot that doesn't, and so as we get the opportunities, can we change that? So my one of my comments on this piece of this national park is we have to grow into the idea of being a national park. I mean, I walk outside this building, I walk out down St. Paul where I work anywhere, and I'm in uniform, and people don't know if I'm the DNR or the National Park Service. What I'm saying with the National Park Service, they want to know what I'm doing here. I tell them there's a national park here, and they're like, what? People don't know because we're not some Grand Canyon or something. So we have to grow into the idea. But since our mission is to help guide development, my vision is this, is that in 10, 15 years, someone somewhere in the country or the world is going to say, there's a national park that's about doing the right thing on the Mississippi. And it's in Minneapolis, it's in the Twin Cities. You need to go to the Twin Cities to see how good development's done. Because we're going to have so many examples of really good 21st century development that respects the environment, that's based on really good civic engagement, that is forward-looking in its design and brings in is, deals with equity and sustainability. And so imagine if we were Like national parks are the top models of the things that they are. Imagine if we were the top model for that. That's my vision for what we could do.
Well, my question comes back kind of the same thing. So in other words, you have this great doctrine, you have this great, documents, but they don't sound like they have any legal teeth. And as a result of that, I certainly appreciate your sentiments, I appreciate your point of view and the value and the virtues that you attribute to Mississippi. But it's clear and obvious that the city of Minneapolis doesn't share your point of view. It's real obvious that the developers don't share your point of view. So what kind of consequence do we have to protect this national park?
So Michael's question at the base is, the national park here doesn't have much teeth. And so how can we do anything really substantive to protect the resources here? And I would say, again, go back to the critical area rules. They are rules now. They define development and how development is supposed to be done. We want to hold the developers to those rules. Don't propose a 10, 12-story tall hotel basically right on the river at the north end of the site and think that's just going to be ramrodded through.
Would you pull in, and so again, if there's already been precedent set to define, is there, and if development doesn't meet those standards, can we do any type of injunction, any kind of class action suit? Could the National Park Service, if the feds, it seems to me almost like the civil rights movement. If states and cities and counties did not want to play fair, play nice in the sandbox, then residents were left with only one recourse. They had to go to a higher court of law, in other words, the federal. And so you looking at that model, could we, because again, it's real crystal clear to me, and maybe many people in this room, that the city is not playing nice. And what are the legal consequences that we have in our toolbox so that we can stop their efforts and really move to that golden standard that you've already laid out clearly in your letter and before us here tonight?
So again, summarizing the question is, so what can a citizen do through our National Park Service presence to actually hold a developer accountable? And so it's not at the federal level so much as it is at the state level, because you can go to the Department of Natural Resources. The DNR oversees the critical area program, and you could bring it to the DNR. So that's one level. So you can bring it to the DNR and say, hey, DNR, you're in charge of overseeing the critical area rules. This project doesn't meet the critical area rules. If they want to come for a variance, they're going to appear before the city of Minneapolis and talk, can you do something about the variance to do more away from critical area rules? And so you can go at that level. Also, the city of Minneapolis is in the process of doing its ordinance and its comprehensive plan. And so as they start doing its ordinance for implementing these rules, you have a chance to review that to see, is it doing what was intended by the rulemaking process. And then we, of course, would weigh in as the National Park Service with this arrowhead, this arrowhead, even if it doesn't have a lot of teeth at times, has a lot of power to get people thinking bigger about things and better.
Questions, but I think maybe it's kind of, and I think you anticipated it when you said it would be nice if Minneapolis were the keystone example of ecologically sound and equitable development. So are there any other examples you're aware of where along the river corridor where they have done some good development that would meet the critical area rules? And are those critical area rules prescriptive or proscriptive? In other words, do they say, thou shalt not do this? Or do they say, this is how you do good development?
So there's two parts of it. One is, are there other examples in our corridor around the country? Because our corridor is you know, the new rules are in place, so we don't have anything specifically yet that I can think of right offhand, or because the ordinances are just being done, and we'll see once they're done how strong we can use them. Nationally, you know, each community looks at riverfront differently. Or waterfronts are really coming back nationally and worldwide to be developed, but each one is very, very different. I haven't had time to research that and answer that question, to be fair. So I don't know is what I'd have to say.
We put that in the next steps. Follow up if you do come across any. We could look at national riverfront models.
Well, yeah, we could look at national riverfront models. I think it's always good to bring an example in the picture and say, hey, here's how they did it, you know, in San Antonio, or here's how they did it in Arkansas, or the Chattahoochee River in Alabama, I think. And so, you know, there's other places to look at where things are being done.
Has the DNR ever filed suit to force
So the question is, has the DNR actually filed a lawsuit with regard to the rules? It hasn't happened yet because the rules really aren't even in place yet. We're still working to get those rules in place. And under the executive orders, it was much softer. It was much harder for the DNR to bring a lawsuit because each community could kind of look at things differently and did things differently. But now again, the rule fighting process took over 5 years, and there were serious arguments about the rules. I had to testify before an administrative law judge to say, here's why we, the National Park Service, believe the rules should be put in place. You know, I said to the judge, I said, who I knew was conservative, and I said, you know, this was a test. Senator Durenberger said, trust the state to do the right thing. If these rules are less than what the Secretary of the Interior signed on to in 1995, if you start undermining what the Secretary agreed to, it's a demonstration the state can't be trusted. And maybe the Park Service would have to come in with its own rules. So this was a chance for the cooperative federalism idea to work. And the judge got that. And the rules went through as proposed, pretty much intact. I have my remarks from it on my computer, but I don't know that there was a court reporter there who recorded all the testimony on it. I'm sure you can find it somewhere. I don't know where. The question was, where is that testimony from the administrative law judge? I would say it's I'm not sure where it's housed, but it's definitely there.
Okay. In listening to you, I'm learning, like I hope would be one of our experiences, that there are certain rules, regulations, and guidelines in place that the policymakers are supposed to be guided by, especially within the comprehensive plan. Now, I know legally each city has to do a comprehensive plan and put things in there. But in terms of following up what's in that plan, they don't have to do it. So it becomes part of the community to hold them accountable. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back and see what's in the comp plan. I've read the comp plan, but in regards to housing, et cetera, et cetera. But you're bringing things to mind. And so I said all that. With the city and the park board now in the process of various committees making decisions, have they connected with you in regards to learning what these policy rules and regulations are that perhaps would have an impact on some of their decisions?
Well, we've certainly talked with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. I've met with Kate a number of times, and so the question is, I'm sorry. So has the city approached us? Have they asked us, or the Park and Rec Board, the developers approached us to understand what our rules and regulations are? The city, no, in the developer, no, in no way. I mean, in the 3 meetings I attended at the Park and Rec Board hearings, the developer didn't mention once that there was a national park here, and didn't once acknowledge the Mississippi River as one of the great rivers of the world being right there. And I was really taken aback by that.
And that's sad because they're making major decisions and not knowing guidelines out there, and a lot of the community doesn't know and realize this either. And so it could, in the end, it could turn out to be a real runaround.
Yeah, so it could be a real issue if they're not paying attention to these rules at this stage. So as I wrote in our letter to the city, either they don't know they exist or they don't care, or they think they can run over them when they need to. And so none of those answers are good. And so how do we get, in this next stage of the planning, the rules and the ideas behind the creation of this national park followed?
And I would hope that our local intermediary, Minneapolis Park and Rec, would be more vocal and more of a watchdog, understanding the complex relationship between city, state, and federal. And so, quite frankly, has Minneapolis Park and Rec really done due diligence in terms of regard to the river, making sure that the standards that you've already put in place are being adhered to? Again, you're a federal agency. I would hope that on the city level that we also have watchdogs, advocates, those who are promoting these values for us as a community. Because it's an unfair assumption that we as residents, that number one, we are aware of these intricacies, and number two, we have the capacity to argue it or to, how come it is that we always have to come after the harm is done, rather than have in place checks and balances, make sure that harm isn't, historically we know what's happening. Well, how come we don't put in place some regulatory systems, whether or not it's clean air or whatever it is, that is making sure that cities, states, counties are adhering to these values?
If you couldn't hear that, so again, where, for one, is the Park and Rec Board being a watchdog in this at all was kind of the first part of it. And I would say we've met with the Park Rec Board. I mean, the part of the property that they're working on is going to be what we envision, what we want to see. Their ability to be a watchdog over the city of Minneapolis is kind of hard. I don't think they have the authority to do that. I know they're in conversation with the city probably frequently and trying to do the best they can. But to the second part of your comment, can we have these rules in place before something happens? The rules are in place. We just have to get them adhered to. And so that there's one part of this. So again, this National Park Service has some tools for your toolbox. We don't have all the tools. We have some tools that say if you're going to design something for this property within the first 100 feet, this is the way you should treat it. Within the first 300 feet, if you're going to build something, it should be of this height and ideally tiered back. If you're outside that 300 feet, then you can do a lot more. You can build higher and higher buildings so that across the railroad tracks in particular, between 94 and the railroad tracks where the tall apartment buildings are being proposed, that could still happen there. And so, the critical area rules allow for lots of different kind of development in a place like this 48 acres that could really do a lot of really great things. So start with those and then find out, well, what else do we have? What are the other tools we can bring out of the toolbox?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My question was about that zone. I noticed what the good review was, there was a development there, and go down there, there's grasses and native grasses that come at least 50 feet up from the river. And that might have been before the ordinance went through. The question is, in terms of restorative and regenerative rules, can there be amendments to rules or enforcement around a regenerative plan that looks at the relationship between forest land
wild rices and native rices along the river that act regeneratively for the river? And I'm asking that based on a conversation with the director of the river teams about the water question and water biologist stuff there. The river needs space. And that seems to be what the rules are saying, the river needs space. But what kind of space? So is there regenerative plans or are there development plans? I just want to.
So the question is, are there regenerative planning, is there regenerative planning in the critical area rules? Protection of, the land a certain distance away from the river for native vegetation. There is, in the rules and in our critical comprehensive management plan, there are provisions for, that's why we want those setbacks. The first 100 feet or the first 60 feet are for for vegetation. Don't build in that first 60 feet under the rules. It's 50 feet from the river. You don't build anything. That first 50 feet is for vegetation, natural habitat, ideally. And so whatever you put in there, you could put in there. Under our comprehensive management plan, we're saying undisturbed 40 feet in minimal disturbance, another 60. 100 feet is what we're advocating for in the comprehensive plan, or the commissioners who developed that plan agreed to that would be the best practice. Under our comprehensive management plan, which is this document signed by the governor and the Secretary of the Interior and developed by a 24-person commission, they recommended that the land 40 feet from the ordinary high water mark was undisturbed. And for the next 60 feet back, there was minimal disturbance, such as plantings that would be the kind of native plantings you might want at this site. So it's a green space. The thing here is that the Park and Rec Board's plans probably cover that whole 101st feet. And so that part is pretty much guaranteed. It's really the land, back from that 100 feet that is where you start talking about what buildings are going to go in, what are they going to look like, how big are they going to be. Yeah.
That is, we understood the bottom of the buildings. When there's native grasslands, right now we're dealing with a potential, right? But maybe not. There's some discussion that it's not, but the ground hasn't been done. Is there anything in the rules that covers setting the stage for the restoration of the soil food web so that those regenerative natural filtration systems that result in beautifully clear and net positive water at the headwaters could kind of start moving downstream and continue that?
So the question is there other provisions in the rules for restoring the land in certain places?
That skin of the river, that first 100
Yeah, that first 100 feet.
wall, like from margins to the concrete.
Yeah.
And dirt that has had fertilizer.
Yeah, so the goal is within that first 100 feet really to restore the land, restore that edge of the river. It's not, it's in the rules in terms of the setbacks and the areas you protect. But again, that I don't know how far back the Park and Rec Board land is going to go, the 19 plus acres, but it's a strip along the river there. So that piece is really something to talk to the Park and Rec Board about and say, what are your plans for that part of land that you're going to get? That's a conversation with the Park and Rec Board. It's not in the rules, again, I've already talked about, but in terms of what actually happens on the land and how you remediate it is going to be a conversation with, I could be the city before they give it to the Park and Rec Board, because I don't know or with the Park and Rec Board. Kate's shaking her head. Yes, it's with the Park and Rec Board. So again, there's people in this room, and I think one of the best things conversations I've found is that when someone in the room who knows more than I do raises their hand and said, hey, John, Colleen, I know more than you do, John, about that, because Colleen works on these issues day in, day out, whereas I'm working on 100 different issues day in, day out. And I can't remember what I read in the critical area rules a few years ago. So, Colleen, speak up if you want to say something on critical area. Kate, if you want to say something on Park and Rec Board, say something. And then it's a conversation. It's not me just lecturing. Thank you, Kate.
As I'm listening to you, I'm realizing that the also the regional parks come under their purview. And they also approve the comprehensive plans of all the cities. And there are a lot of comprehensive plans and cities in place along the Mississippi. Now, my question is, are they talking to you in regards to this? Because if they're approving the comp plans and don't realize in terms of the rules and regulations that need to be in place, in their comp plans with parks, then they're operating in the dark and they're creating more problems for us, everybody, and they're making themselves look foolish if they're not taking it to things like this.
So the comment really is that the Metropolitan Council also has authority, especially with these comprehensive plans. And are they looking at it to make sure the critical rules, area rules, are embodied with those plans? And Friends of the Mississippi River is reviewing every one of those comprehensive plans. We had a plan on our staff who was reviewing every one of those, and he left us, unfortunately. And but we're having someone else do it. And we've looked at most of those comprehensive plans, and overall, they're doing a good job of embedding these in their comprehensive management plans. There's some we've added comments where they could do them better, but overall, they're starting to look good. Colleen, would you agree with that?
No, I mean, I think you look at it as not a rule, like at that point, a lot of what's in comprehensive plan can be from the opposite of the city. And so river protection, they're kind of moving into the city law phase.
Yep.
But, cities and development and all the time that they talk about.
So these rules need to move to ordinance, right? Yeah, but like you said, you move from the comprehensive plan, management plan, once it's approved, to ordinances that then do that. And the rules are going to necessitate those ordinances in each city.
Specifically, it seems like as we go from the concept time of March, coordinated plan of the spring, we're having this conversation about hey, would you like to have an option venue, southern segment, or closer up here to Dowling, or would you like to have housing closer to Riverfront, or would you like to see housing not at this location, but instead maybe closer to Dowling and Washington Avenue, along with commercial retail space, a lot of development that's going to take place. It's just all of this stuff is happening and it's supposedly not settled on, and they have CATs and other representatives that are helping me. How do we help enforce the river and match the area rules when we don't necessarily know what exactly they're planning to have a concept plan that says what might happen, but we know we're moving around some pieces. We haven't quite nailed them down yet. So how do we even know, for example, if you phrase the question, why isn't the plan actually just in the guidelines to help inform what the plan should, the coordinated plan should be?
Great question, Alex. Alexis. So there's all this planning going on. They're moving pieces of the board around in the upper terminal, like your table here. They're moving the papers around to different positions. But they're not starting with, I think what the whole purpose of these sessions are going to be about is, have you looked at the Mississippi River Corridor critical area rules when you're doing that? Because that piece of paper you just moved to that site doesn't work under those rules, so therefore you shouldn't move it there. Oh, and if you understand the comprehensive plan for the city of Minneapolis, that's not going to work there either. Or if you understand one of the other tools you're going to be learning about, you say it doesn't work on those tools. And so this idea that get all the tools in the toolbox, then have your meeting about where to move things is kind of, I think, what you're asking or saying.
Yeah, no, I'm asking, in your knowledge of treaty law, when the treaties were signed here, our grandfathers didn't give up in the city territory, but they did allow the government agencies to partner in that stewardship. In your opinion, have our treaties been violated here? And do we have a right to legal action by the
So the question is, have the treaties signed here been violated in a way that there would be some that violates our right to environmental stewardship. Hard question, because you're looking at the East Bank, the Treaty of 1837, and the West Bank, the Treaty of 1851. And they're, so the 1837, the Dakota give up their lands east of the Mississippi. I don't know, I have to look at a map to see the exact boundaries. And by the Treaty of Mendota in 1851, they give up their lands west of the Mississippi River. So you can look at those treaties and see what they say. Treaty law is complex. You'd have to look at that treaty and say, are there provisions within that treaty that state how the land can be used or not used? For example, there's a term called Winter's Doctrine. The Winter's Doctrine says that if in a treaty a tribe had the right to hunt and gather on a piece of property, and that's provided for in the treaty, then they have a right to hunt and gather. That's one of the issues at Mille Lacs Lake, is about being able to fish walleye. And that happens in other places. So you'd have to look at those provisions in law. And I say this as, it's complex. I say this as someone who's got a doctorate in American Indian history. And that was my focus in college. And then I've been a tribal coordinator much of my career. It is very complex. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not in a position to answer how it works with these treaties, but you could certainly talk to lawyers who could weigh in on it. I was not trying to get around the answer. It's just, I'd have to look at each treaty carefully, and then I'd have to ask a lawyer.
So it gets into our religious freedom, bit of a way of protecting our lands using our international treaty rights.
Yeah, so other provisions within treaty law that or these treaties for this place that would allow for the protection of sacred sites or historically significant sites, places of meaning to the Dakota or others. Again, you'd have to look at the treaty, because it's most arguments over treaty law end up in the Supreme Court. That's how complex it gets if you try to change something or interpret it differently. So, as a federal agency, a tribe under executive order, presidential executive order 13007, can declare a site sacred. We don't get to ask questions about the rationale behind that. We can't ask for documentation or evidence. If a tribal spiritual leader, endorsed by their council and their president, or the council itself and president, declare a site sacred under Executive Order 13007, as a federal agency, we are required to provide access to that property if it's within our ability to do so. United States Air Force on Air Force bases out in the West, huge things. If they can provide access, they're supposed to, and some have accommodated that. And then we're supposed to protect those resources within our abilities as well. So, but that's federal. It doesn't apply to state or city.
So is the state violating federal law by
Not under the executive order, because it's not federal land. So at Coldwater Spring, which we own, some tribes have declared it a sacred site under the executive order. And so we already provide access to that site. We're trying our best to protect that site. We would love to find out where the water's coming from that feeds Coldwater Spring, because we found incredibly high chloride levels in it, 350 to 450 parts per million, where it's supposed to be 10. And we know that's runoff from street salt. It's getting into the aquifers that feed Coldwater Spring. So we're trying to figure out, can we raise money to actually look at the groundwater shed and restore that water quality? But again, it's at the federal level, not at the state or local. Yeah.
Couple of points. When you get involved in land and water issues in federal and state, if you get this thing so complicated that it'd be decades before anything happens on it. Because it doesn't doesn't take much for an individual even to step in and to block things up. But to address Michael's question that he asked earlier about the citizen watching and all, we've got lives to live, and we elect people to look after our interests. And in this particular project, I've seen improper behavior by multiple councilmen, 2 county commissioners, 2 senators, 4 state representatives, agency staff at just about every level. So they're all complicit in this deal. And what is the deal is that the Poland and the Frank people got hip to this land and stuck their nose in it well before the people even knew that it was available. And they positioned themselves that now put us on the outside looking like the intruders when we really didn't have a fair chance to play when the request for proposals go out. So I think because of all this complicated stuff that's gone on and went on, what has to happen now is the folks that are in the project need to be pointed out clearly to them what they've done and that we know that, and they need to stop. And they need to rescind the development agreement, and they need to issue a new request for proposals. So a whole new group of people, like myself and colleagues of mine that are in the agriculture business, that think that that would be a great spot for processing the non-psychoactive hemp that's being grown throughout Minnesota. They say it's probably one of the best industrial locations with interstate access, with a railroad spur, with river access once we reopen the parts. It's a prime location for development and generation of future wealth.
So do you have a question? This is an educational thing, sorry, for MPS topics, for this hour. We've got time afterwards to go into other areas.
So the point that I'm making of the whole thing is that this is getting so complicated and so many groups forming that it's going to bring the project to a standstill, that nothing is going to happen. So that's the danger that we're running through what he's saying. Very good points that he's making.
Yeah.
Federal and land and water rights and things like that. It doesn't take much for a short motion in a court to clap everything up for 6 months. Then another guy comes along. So we need.
We're here, I think, to create a new narrative.
What?
So create a new narrative. So we're not necessarily chasing the narrative that's going on. It's good to know what's going on. But we're blank slating with, if this parcel were available, what are best practices? And we've got.
I think it's verbalized.
Right. What are your favorite question? We've got 10 minutes left.
We need to find out, or to be certain, that we're within the guide that's going to get him and his agency on our side, so that we're not outside of it. Whatever these heights are and distances, and I know about that complication because a friend of mine was on the river and he had property there, and John is still on the river, and it's complicated stuff. So we need to make sure that the Park Service is on our side. We need to find out his outside length and let the people know from this entity that you need to stop what you're doing. It's not getting the approval. Let all the politicians know and start again. It's never too late.
Yeah, so
Stop a bad project.
So, Leslie, what you've been really bringing up is that there's a whole other set of tools that others can talk about better than I can. One being the DNR. Bring someone here from the Department of Natural Resources who oversees these rules. Oh, he's in California, isn't he? Yeah, Dan. Yeah, so there's someone from the DNR who's really expert on this. He just happens to telework from California, but he's extremely knowledgeable. Or FMR, Friends of the Mississippi River, could talk about critical rules, and they can talk from a much more direct advocacy position than I can. So if you want to learn more about the rules and the ins and outs of the rules, there's others to do that. If you want to look at legal tools, to other kind of legal tools, to look at what's happened in the past, that's another speaker. It's not me. So again, I'm trying to give you some tools that I know, 2 levels of tools. One that got some teeth, which is the critical area rules, and others that are more passionate and just visionary. And I know that with comp plans or master plans that you hope to bring in and talk about, those are visionary as well. And so there's past visions that have been defined for this property. Why aren't we starting with those as we think about it?
Are there any other questions you folks that would come to that?
It's very simple. The Park Service has a number of centers, for example, in the science museum. What's your budget for Upper Harbor? Around it? And what are your plans, other than providing the guidelines, what are you going to put there as a customer?
So the question is, we have, we have a visitor center in the Science Museum. We've taken over visitor management at the lock at St. Anthony. We have 72 miles to take care of. What's my budget for the Upper Harbor Terminal? My budget for my whole 72 miles, 21 communities, 4 townships, is $2 million for about 20 employees. And one of the big differences to your point is, though, we had a planner here from the Midwest region of the National Park Service in Omaha. They came to talk about planning, and he looked across the table and he said, I'm looking at 5 planners. There's no park in the region that has 5 planners, because we were created to help plan. So I have a bigger planning staff than most parks no park my size in the country has that many planners. We're hoping to hire one pretty soon. The offer was made today, I believe, to replace Rory. So we will get a new planner on. It will be specifically working on these kind of things. But our staff is challenged by the number of projects in this corridor and the significance of them right now. So it's part of an FTE. We have part of an FTE that we dedicate, our full-time equivalent position, that we will put on this project, and hopefully they can track it closer than we've been able to lately. Anybody else who hasn't asked a question?
Say we want these followed.
So the question is, could you put those rules to paper, put them on, take your table with the map of the Upper Harbor Terminal saying, if you want to adhere to curricular rules, here's what can go where. And kind of begin with that kind of start drawing in the blank slate and saying, well, it's really not such a blank slate if you look at existing rules. If you look at, and then you're going to have some other people come in and saying, it's really not a blank slate if you look at existing environmental visions that have been codified for the city, and you start adding layer to layer, and then you get to the point where you say, well, that makes sense. But again, as I said earlier, you have to look at the context. What does this site do that has to be done on this site versus done upriver, downriver, or across the freeway? So yeah, I think that's a great idea. Is that maybe after each one of these meetings, Kelly, you put the map up on the wall here. And you say, okay, after we heard John, maybe that hospitality center really can't go at the north end because it's not consistent with the rules at all. It could go on the south end, back of the 300 feet, because then it can be as tall as it wants, and that would be a place where that could go if you want that. And you could do that with other structures as well.
Traditionally, so you are planners and work with communities up and down that 72 miles, helping them design riverfront development. Usually, under most terms, have you been asked by a city to embark on that journey, or how do you normally get to that position? And if the city or the park has not asked you to do that at this Upper Harbor terminal, might we, as a collection of agencies, concerned citizens, individuals, might we be thus empowered to be able to request that of you, of your agency, so that then again for many people, Tom raised it, I think, how can we bring your agency to aid and abet us in this design process that meets the rules that are already in place? how might we as concerned citizens embark on that journey?
So the question is, how can you as concerned citizens get the National Park Service at the table in a way that can make a difference? That has not happened so far. As I tell people, I'm just big government. I'm big government to many people. It's the citizen voice that matters. If I go in and complain, you're not paying attention to me because I'm big government, you should, it doesn't do anything. But if I know there's a citizen voice behind that statement, it makes all the difference in the world. The question is, why hasn't the National Park Service been at the table in the design process? Did you talk to them? Did you ask them about critical area rules? Do you care about critical area rules? And as you go forward with this process, are you going to have them in the conversation? Because I'd much rather work with them in the process than have to write a really strong letter at the end saying you basically violated the rules. I hope it doesn't come to that.
You see dreaded words from Ronald Reagan, where when you hear them say, we're from the government and we're here to help you. Watch out.
But we are from the federal government and we are here to help you. But it began, and we're getting to the end. Right at the end, you heard my talk about what tools I can put in your toolbox. I don't know if I'm the upper level of that toolbox or I'm down in the middle or where exactly, but we're just one of those tools. And it's the sum of the tools that are going to make the difference.